essential in a good character is the value which one puts in oneself, in humanity, both in regard to the actions towards oneself as in relation to others. For character means that the person takes the rules of his actions out of himself and the dignity of humanity. The self-chosen and firm decisions prove character, but only when they are similar to one another. Immanuel Kant. For Kant, morality is not about actions as such. Actions by themselves are neither good nor bad. Actions can have legality, that is, they can be in accordance with the moral law, they can be the actions that we should do, but that does not necessarily mean that we, as a person, have morality. That depends on our will. I explained that in my previous lecture on the good will and good deeds, that to Kant it is just the will which makes a person moral, the good will. Of course, from the good will spring good actions as far as is in our power. But we could also do these legal actions without a good will, for selfish reasons, because it just so happens that whatever morality dictates is also in line with our own selfish goals in this case. Now, when it comes to the actions we do, the faculty that picks, should I do A or should I do B? For example, should I murder someone or should I save someone's life? But also something more trivial, like should I eat an apple or should I eat chocolate? That faculty by Kant is called choice. I discussed that in the lecture on the faculty of desiring and on choice and will. Choice, Kant calls this faculty which, chooses between doing A or B or C. And since our morality is not dependent simply on what our choice chooses, like B, saving someone, as opposed to A, killing someone, may be the legal action, the one that I should choose, but once again, just me choosing that action does not necessarily make me a good person. Rather, since it depends on why I choose it, this now becomes an important question. What determines my choice? And I already, in the lecture on the faculty of desiring and on choice and will, I already said that according to Kant, choice is always determined by what he calls a driving spring. Something must, drive my choice, compel my choice to pick A and not B, or to pick B and not A. Otherwise, my choice would just be completely random and arbitrary, like a coin toss happening in my soul. But those driving springs, again, I explained that further in that mentioned lecture, those driving springs can be sensual driving springs, they can be stimuli, or they can be intellectual driving springs, they can be motives. And when it's just my essential desires, my drives, I'm not free and I'm not moral, even if it is a feeling like compassion driving me, determining my choice to help somebody. Since this is just my nature, not something that I really, through my own freedom, through my own autonomy, decided on, this is not really something that makes me a moral person. In order to be a moral person, once again, it must be my will and will to Kant is really just practical reason as such. It must be my will. It must be the moral law itself which determines my choice. And now the question is, how is that possible? How can the will influence the choice? How can the moral law that I think through my reason, the idea of morality, how can that, instead of my sensual desires, how can that determine my choices? How can it become a driving spring, in other words? This question is identical with the question, how can reason be practical at all? Which is a main question of the critique of the practical reason. Because it is clear that reason can be theoretical, that reason can be used for cognition, for understanding things. And it is also clear that this theoretical reason can serve our practical actions as an instrument. That is what Kant calls the technical practical, right? If I have theoretical understanding of how the world works, I can use that understanding to reach my goals. Like if I have certain knowledge of chemistry, of certain substances, when I combine them, what that will lead to, then I can use that to my advantage. Or if I have certain understanding of the natural laws of aerodynamics, I can build a plane with that. But still, reason here is not truly practical. Reason is theoretical, and that which is actually practical is my desire, which is probably not a rational desire. It is just some sort of sensual animal desire at the end of the day. And that desire just uses reason, just employs reason as its instrument to reach its non-rational goal, which is why Kant calls this heteronomy. Autonomy I only have when reason itself gives a law, and that is the moral law. I discussed that in the lecture on what is freedom. And to Kant it is already clear that this is possible. This I also already discussed in the lecture, Do We Have Free Will? Kant shows that yes, reason can be practical. Reason can determine our choices. We do have spontaneity. We do have the freedom to act even against our own desires. But the question remains, how? How can reason be practical? And this is the question I want to discuss here. How can the will function as a driving spring for our choice? Now, what Kant says is that all driving springs, as such, must be feelings and must therefore be sensual in some way. However, most feelings originate from our sensuality and are therefore pathological feelings, as Kant calls them. That sounds like there's something wrong here, like it's some sort of sickness, but that's more like the modern usage of pathology from medicine. If you go back to the ancient Greek, it really just means passivity. So pathological feelings are feelings where we are passive. In other words, they are feelings that we didn't make. We just happen to be affected in a certain way. We can't choose it. Like if you smell a flower, if you stand in front of a flower, you can't help but smell it. And you will either find the smell nice and pleasant, or you will find it disgusting. Again, this is not something that you yourself can pick, right? Or if you cut yourself with a knife, the cutting itself maybe is your choice whether you do it or not. But if you cut yourself, which of course could also be happening by accident, then you will feel pain whether you like it or not. So those feelings, they are pathological, which is precisely the reason why when they serve as driving springs, sensual drives, this is not moral. I may have a feeling of compassion, of empathy, that drives me to help somebody, but I didn't pick that feeling. It just so happens that when I see that others suffering, I'm affected by it in a certain manner, and it just so happens that I suffer too from seeing it, and I want to help that other person. And if this, I discussed that further in my lecture, why compassion and a good heart don't make a good person. If this is my only reason for doing good, that is doing legal actions in accordance with the moral law, I'm really no better than a cruel person who does actions of cruelty, because we both just act on our pathological feelings that just so happen to be there. We both didn't pick our feelings. If I, the compassionate one, somehow stopped feeling compassion and somehow started having a feeling of cruelty, started deriving pleasure from others' suffering, then I would stop helping others and I would start harming them. No, true morality to Kant means that I have autonomy, that I determine myself, that if it has to be, I act even against my pathological feelings and drives. Even if I do feel cruelty and pleasure at the suffering of others, I think about it because I'm a rational being, and I come to the rational conclusion that I shouldn't act like this, that this is wrong, and therefore I don't do it. So pathological feelings cannot serve as driving springs for morality. However, Kant says there is one single feeling which is not pathological in that way, but rather which is a practical feeling, and that is the feeling of reverence. It is a feeling which originates not from our sensuality, but from our intellectuality, and which is practical in the sense that we ourselves make it. So we feel it not because we are affected in a certain way, but because we make a certain decision, we have a certain will, and then sort of affect ourselves. We create this feeling in ourselves. Morality must be based on reverence, that is, reverence for the moral law itself, and for humanity as such, as the lawgiver and the one following the law, or the one who can follow the law. So reverence for the moral law and for the dignity of humanity is what should determine our choice to pick legal actions, to pick the actions that are in accordance with the moral law. And this reverence, once again, we ourselves create it. It is a practical feeling. That means also to Kant that the question, how can I start feeling reverence for the moral law? How can I develop reverence for the moral law? Is really a nonsensical question to Kant. Because to be good, to have a good will, to want to do what the moral law dictates, and to have reverence for the moral law, is really one and the same. So an evil person would not ask, how can I develop reverence for the moral law? He would say, I don't care about the moral law. While if you ask, how can I start feeling reverence for the moral law? I would like to, so to say, revere the moral law. Then that must mean that you already, at least on some level, at least to some degree, have this reverence for the moral law. But before I go on and further explain what this reverence is about, I want to give one note about translation. Kant in German uses the word Achtung, which is one of my favorite words in German. And as is the case with all interesting words in every language, they are hard to translate. Right? There are words in language that are very easy to translate. Like I can say the German word Wasser is the English word water. It's even literally the same word, right? You can hear that it has the same Germanic root. And but even if it didn't, like if I say in another language, it's aqua, let's say, still it has the same meaning, and it's therefore a boring word. But the interesting words, the ones that make a language truly rich, they are hard to translate. When it comes to Achtung, it can have many meanings. It can mean attention, being alert to something. But Achtung can also mean something like taking care. So we say auf etwas achten, and that means to take care of something. Or it can mean to be mindful, to mind something. Again, in the sense of paying attention to it, right? We also have the related word Achtsamkeit, which could be translated as carefulness or mindfulness. But Achtung can also mean something like esteem. So having Achtung for somebody means to hold him in high esteem. Like we can end letters with that. If we want to be very respectful, then we end with hochachtungsvoll, which means full of high Achtung. And you could translate that with holding you in high esteem, or holding you in high regard. In fact, the word regard would probably be my favorite translation for Achtung into English, because I feel like regard has this dual connotation that Achtung also has, of both respecting someone or holding someone in esteem, but also looking at someone, paying attention to someone, caring for someone, right? So when it comes to my own philosophy, Beachtung is also central for morality, but I use it slightly differently from Kant, not exactly in contradiction to Kant, but with a slightly different nuance. When it comes to my own philosophy, I would translate it with regard. However, here I'm not talking about my own moral philosophy, I'm talking about Kant, and so I will go with reverence. I think, as far as I could find, that when you read English translations of Kant, the word Achtung is usually translated with respect, sometimes with moral respect. That I consider a terrible translation, because respect is a word we also have in German, and it's not the same as Achtung. And Kant doesn't use the word respect as a synonym for Achtung ever. Respect is not so much a moral quality. And respect is not something you owe every single person. Respect is something that needs to be earned and that can be lost. Respect you give to someone who acts with decency, or maybe you also pay respect to someone who has certain accomplishments that you must respect. But it is not a universal moral thing. Like someone could be very pathetic and unaccomplished, or someone could be very evil, could be an asshole. Then I wouldn't respect him, but I would still have to have Achtung for him simply because of his humanity. Now, the thing is that it is clear how we should translate the word Achtung. We should translate it as reverence. Why is that clear? Because, as I already mentioned sometimes in previous lectures, Kant has this habit when he introduces an important term, behind it in brackets, he puts the Latin term that he would use for it. And for Achtung, he uses the Latin term reverentia, which is, well, reverence, right? So I really don't know what goes through translators' mind when Kant himself uses the Latin word reverentia, and then they don't translate it as reverence, but rather as moral respect or whatever. Or rather, I do know probably what goes through their mind, because Kant gives this Latin translation only at one point in one text, and it's not in his main work on morality and on Achtung. It's not in the Critique of Practical Reason. It's in a slightly more obscure text. So I assume that many translators who, let's say, translate the Critique of Pure Reason, or also the groundworks to the Metaphysics of Morals, which are really the two main works of moral or meta-moral philosophy of Kant's that deal with Achtung, with reverence, I would assume that many translators are not aware of this translation, this Latin translation that Kant himself gives. And that's one issue when it comes to translating Kant. Not everyone has, of course, like me, read all 29 volumes of Kant, but maybe they should if they want to translate him. It's an issue, I think, when they have just read like one or two works, maybe they even have just read the work that they are currently translating, because then they lack the whole, they lack the bigger picture, they lack certain references, they don't know how certain important terms are used in other parts of Kant's philosophy. But anyways, since Kant is unambiguous, since he uses the word reverentia, I will also go with reverence. Now I will start off my explanation by mentioning that in 18th century, there was this moral theory that is called moral sense theory. It was especially influential in British thinking, amongst thinkers that Kant read and that Kant was influenced by and that Kant did respect, such as Shaftesbury, Hutcheson, Hume. And it also had some influence on certain German thinkers, especially around the middle or the later half of the 18th century. There was this literary epoch of sentimentality, right? Not just in Germany, that was influenced by this theory. And this moral sense theory basically assumes that human beings have, well, a moral sense, like a sort of sixth sense, that tells them what is or what isn't moral. Like you have a feeling, this is right and this is wrong. And so morality is really about following this feeling. For example, that might be your feeling of compassion or of empathy. So if you feel empathy with somebody, you know that you should help him. And when you don't, like you don't feel empathy with a stone being kicked down the road, so you know that here no moral action is required. The stone can be kicked. Now, Kant would agree that many people, that the common people without philosophical education, uh, that yes, they do go, when it comes to their morality, they do go after a feeling of what feels right or what feels wrong. And he would also say that they are not completely wrong about this. We do have such feelings, yeah. Sometimes a person maybe cannot really explain, cannot really put into words why something is wrong, why lying to somebody, tricking somebody's money out of him uh, is the wrong thing to do, but they will say, this just doesn't feel right, I don't want to do this. And this is something that happens, of course, not only in morality, but also in other matters, like take, for example, grammar. If you are a regular person, not a linguist, then maybe you don't really understand why something is correct grammar or something, another formulation is incorrect grammar. But if you really know the language, especially if it's your first language, you will just say, maybe, I cannot explain why this is wrong, but it just doesn't feel wrong. This just doesn't feel like correct English or correct German or whatever. So Kant would say that this is what the person who is not a scholar will often fall back to a feeling. But he would insist that this feeling is really, you do know the rule, like the moral rule or the grammatical rule, you just aren't conscious of it. You have no clear knowledge of it. It is some sort of unconscious knowing of the rule, and that is what you then describe as your feeling. But there still must be a rule, and the rule must be in the intellect. I gave a lecture on the intellect, which, according to Kant, is the faculty of rules. To Kant, while the common people will refer to something feeling right or wrong, and while they are actually justified to do so, he still very much rejects the moral sense theory, and even says that it's not just wrong philosophy, it's completely unphilosophical, precisely because it ultimately it rejects thinking and goes to some sort of feeling, some sort of intuition that cannot be discussed, that cannot be understood, which is the opposite of philosophy, because philosophy is about understanding. The basic error that the moral sense theorists fall prey to, Kant says, is that they confuse what he calls the guideline or the yardstick of morality with the driving spring of morality. Because to him, those are two very different and very distinct things. What he calls the yardstick is that which tells us what is and what isn't moral, what we should and what we shouldn't do. So it's like a measurement that we hold against a certain action, and that lets us measure whether that action is right or wrong. We should do it or we shouldn't do it. And then the driving spring, on the other hand, is that which drives our choice to do that action. And those are, of course, two different things, right? You could understand on a theoretical level what is moral, what is your moral duty, but still not be driven to actually do it, right? Like some evil person could maybe say, yeah, what I'm doing is evil, but I don't care. I don't want to be good. I understand on a theoretical level. If I think about the categorical imperative, I explained the categorical imperative in its own lecture on the moral law. I explained that it is really about asking yourself, can my maxim, that is my principle according to which I act, could that be a universal law? So let's say you lie to someone to get his money. You could maybe very well understand that, yes, this cannot be a universal law, and I myself cannot want for everyone to act like this. If lying and tricking became universal, then it would also become impossible, because no one would trust and believe each other anymore, and you cannot lie to somebody who doesn't trust you anyways. But while he could understand that, while he could admit, I don't want my actions or the principle of my actions to become a universal law, he could still say, but I don't care about acting according to a principle that could be universal. I only care about my selfish gain. So understanding what is moral and actually feeling like doing what is moral are two different things. And the error of the moral sense theory is that they believe the moral feeling, what they call the moral feeling, and Kant identifies the moral feeling once again with reverence. Of course, you could also believe the moral feeling is something else, like compassion or empathy, but be that as it may, they are in agreement that there is some sort of moral feeling. But where they differ from Kant and where they err is that they believe the moral feeling is the yardstick of morality. So the moral feeling is not just what makes us want to pick a certain action, but that it is also what tells us that that action is the right thing to do. And this cannot be, Kant says. The yardstick of morality must not be a feeling, it must be intellectual. It must be something we can think about. It must be something we can give reasons for. We can justify in front of our own reason and in front of others' reason, and something that we can discuss and come to an agreement about. If it were a feeling that tells us what is and what isn't moral to do, then morality would be relative, because everyone feels differently, right? And if my feeling changed, morality would change. Or if two people have a different feeling, they would have a different morality. And we could then not really communicate about our morality, because at the end of the day, it would just come down to us feeling differently. Like if you say, for example, the moral feeling is compassion, and compassion tells you when you ought to help someone or not hurt someone, well, then consider the matter of morality against animals. Like, should you be vegetarian or vegan or not? Someone might say, I feel compassion towards animals. When I see animals suffering, I suffer too. That tells me that I mustn't eat animals. I mustn't kill and eat them. Well, another person could say, I agree with you in general that we should go by compassion, but I only feel compassion for my own kind. I feel compassion for my fellow human beings, but an animal is just an animal to me. I don't feel compassion when the animal dies. So I feel totally justified in enjoying my meat. Now, how would these two discuss? They feel as they feel. There's nothing to be done about it. if you base morality on reason, as Kant does, if you say that the yardstick of morality is a moral law that our reason gives, then you can now discuss, is it rational? Does reason allow us to eat animals or not? Which is its own matter. I will, at some later point, I will get into what Kant says about morality insofar as it concerns animals. So, the yardstick of morality, that which tells us what is moral, what ought to be done, that should be intellectual. That is our reason, Kant says. But he doesn't fully reject the concept of a moral feeling. He says it has a place in moral theory, just not as the yardstick of morality, but as the driving spring. So, because without a driving spring, morality would just be a theory in our head. We would think, oh yeah, it would be the right thing to do this, but we wouldn't care about doing the right thing, and we would just have our sensual driving springs, our desires that drive us to go after our selfish gain. And therefore, Kant would say that the formal part of morality comes from reason. That is, thinking about which form should my actions have, what should I actually do. But the material part of morality, that is us actually doing what is moral, actually acting in this form, in this manner, that comes from a feeling, from a moral feeling, which again is the feeling of reverence. At some point, Kant gives an analogy which I think is very helpful in better understanding this. And here he compares the moral human being with a state. And of course, in a state, as you know, you have the three powers. You have the legislative power, you have the executive power, and you have the judiciary. And within a single individual, Kant would say that reason should serve as the legislative power. So our reason should have autonomy, and through our reason, we should give ourselves the moral law. We should, so to say, give ourselves a constitution for our own actions that all our actions must conform to. And this legislative power, again, this is what Kant means by yardstick. This cannot be done by a feeling. It would be completely arbitrary to let a feeling give us laws. No, the laws must come from reason. But if a state just had a legislative power, like if there was a parliament passing laws, but no one would enforce those laws, then, well, the parliament could decide whatever they like. People probably wouldn't care. The average people on the street would probably do whatever they want. So the state or the government also needs an executive power that actually enforces the laws. There needs to, for example, be a police that makes sure that people follow those laws and don't break them, that the laws are respected. And this executive power in the individual, that would be what Kant calls the driving spring, and that is indeed a feeling. That is the feeling of reverence. Our reason passes a moral law, but since we feel reverence for that law, that is the reason we actually act according to it. I want to complete this analogy since I already started with it, but only these parts reason as the legislative and the moral feeling as the executive. Only this is necessary to understand what I just talked about, the difference between the yardstick and the driving spring of morality. Let's complete the analogy. Of course, the third power, the judiciary, that would be conscience. Just like the judge has to judge whether the law was followed correctly or whether the law was broken, so in you as an individual, your conscience has to make this judgment. Did I actually follow the law that reason gave? Did I actually act out of a moral feeling of reverence or not? What exactly conscience is to Kant, I will discuss in its own lecture, but it does serve the function of this third power. And then, of course, there's also a fourth element in a state, because a state can't just have these three powers. What would they have power over? What would they rule over? There also needs to be a people, right? There also need to be citizens. And these, Kant would say, in the analogy, are our drives and inclinations. And in a state, the various citizens might, of course, have different goals. Goals that might get in conflict with one another. Like, I might want my neighbor's car, so I might be inclined to steal it. And that is precisely why we need a state in the first place, why we need laws. The laws should make sure that there's no chaos, there's no war between people, but rather they can live together in some sort of harmony without taking each other's freedom away, without attacking each other. The same is true for the individual, Kant would say. Your various inclinations, your various sensual drives, they might get in conflict with one another. Like, you might want to be lazy and sleep in, but you also probably want to have a roof over your head and therefore have money to pay rent. So you don't want to lose your job. So there would be chaos. There would be your different drives, your different desires being in conflict with one another, unless you, as a rational being, give yourself certain laws for your conduct through your reason. And in both cases, Kant would say there shouldn't be despotism. I will explain this further when I get to his political philosophy, but basically, Kant would say that the laws are there to save freedom. I explained already in the lecture on what is freedom that to Kant there's a difference between what he calls the wild or the savage freedom and the freedom under the law. And this wild freedom in the end destroys itself. It is completely unrestricted freedom that for that very reason will lead to taking its own freedom away. It needs some restrictions, it needs some law as a framework within which freedom can safely be lived. And this is what the law should do. The law should, of course, restrict us, should, of course, take some freedom away, like the freedom to steal, to rape, to murder, but only as much freedom as must be taken away to save freedom. But the law should not go further. The law should not take all freedom away. That would be despotic. And that would even be despotic if it was done with good intentions. Like, the law should not be there to force people to be happy. because everyone has his own concept of happiness. The ruler cannot just apply his concept of happiness to everyone. So Kant would say it should be as the American Declaration of Independence says, that everyone has a right to the pursuit of happiness. So everyone should have the freedom to try to become happy, as long as it doesn't involve taking others' freedoms away. But the state shouldn't force people to become happy according to a certain concept, like they tried in the French Revolution, or like the communists tried, or like fundamentalist states like Iran may try. Um, and this also, once again, applies to the individual. So Kant does believe that the drives, the inclinations that are like the people, the citizens in a state, do need some restrictions through a rational law. Otherwise, there would be chaos, and otherwise, freedom would destroy itself. But he is not for what he calls the virtue of monks. He is not for morality that is about complete asceticism. He is not for he is not an enemy of all pleasures. He would say you can you can go after your desires. You can try to have pleasure. You can, if you have an appetite for something tasty, you can try to eat it, as long as you don't steal. If you want to have sex, you can have sex, as long as you don't rape. So morality is not meant to be despotic, to be some sort of self tyranny, to take away all pleasures of life, to completely deny all your desires. Rather, morality is just meant to give a rational, a good framework for your actions, for your freedom, for how you live your life. And here I think the analogy is also helpful to understand the difference between autonomy of the will, where reason itself gives the law to itself and to sensuality, to the drives, and on the other hand, the heteronomy of the will, where it's the other way around, where the sensual inclinations rule, and reason really just serves them as an instrument to reach their goals. I discussed this difference between autonomy and heteronomy in the lecture on what is freedom, but I think this analogy with the state is helpful in better grasping it. Because the autonomy would be, of course, if you have the rule of law. That is, if not the people are directly in charge, but rather the government, the legislative, let's say the parliament, is in charge. Of course, the parliament should be, or the legislative, however it's organized, should be a representative one. It should only give laws that the people, if they were rational, could have given to themselves. It should not give arbitrary, despotic laws that unnecessarily restrict freedom. But still, it should give laws independently of the people and independently of what they happen to want right now. While the heteronomy in the individual, in the state, that would be ochlocracy, so mob rule, right? In the political theories of antiquity, the three forms of rulership, they all have a good and a bad form, right? There's for the rulership of one person, there's monarchy and there's tyranny. For the rulership of many people, there's aristocracy and there's oligarchy. And then for the rulership of everyone, there's democracy, the rulership of the people, the demos. And there's ochlocracy, which is, mob rule, right? When the people are not really the people, but just a mob. And this would mean that the people basically dictate what should happen. They're arbitrary, they're selfish, they're short-sighted desires, and the government, including the legislative, is really just there to be at their service, to give them whatever they want, right? In antiquity, if the people wanted to banish someone, right, all of the people together could maybe vote to banish someone or maybe even to kill someone, and then that would happen. And as it happens, this is the understanding of politics and of democracy that we have right now, right? This is, you could say, what liberalism necessarily leads to. I discussed in the lecture what is freedom. I discussed what is the liberal concept of freedom, what I call the liberal concept of freedom. And I said that liberalism, and I said there that today pretty much everyone is a liberal. Like, there are leftist liberals, there are rightist liberals, doesn't matter, they are all liberals. Liberalism means that you understand freedom to be just following your desires, following your impulses. You don't question why you have those desires and impulses, where they come from, if they are truly yours, or maybe just come from your nature or from how you were raised and manipulated maybe. You don't question yourself. You even get angry when somebody else asks you to question yourself and to reflect. You don't ask your reason what should be done, what would be good, objectively good. No, you just say, I have a desire for this, so I want it. Period. That is liberal freedom. And this liberal freedom, if you apply it to politics, if you understand democracy through the lens of this liberal freedom, that will lead necessarily to ochlocracy, to mob rule, to once again demanding that the legislative just passes the laws that you would like to see, not necessarily laws that are right. Because that is not the same thing. That is why Kant is also not a Democrat, but a Republican. Not speaking, of course, of the American parties here. Because the principle of a republic is not absolute democracy in the sense that the majority just decides what happens, but rather it is that you should have rule of law. That is what matters most to Kant. And the laws, like if you live in a state with a constitution, then this constitution binds even the government and even the people who vote for the government, right? Like, for example, the German constitution has certain basic rights or basic laws that cannot be changed even by 100%. Even if one party had 100% of the vote, the law that, for example, there is no death penalty could not be changed. Every single German could be for introducing capital punishment, but still the constitution says no. It says everyone has a right to live. Human dignity must not be attacked in any manner, so you cannot change that law. That may not be democratic, but it is republican. It is the rule of law. Law enforcing right, law making sure that everyone has their rights and keeps their rights, and as opposed to the mob, the people with their arbitrary desires and ideologies and prejudices, just demanding that certain things be done, that certain things become law, even if they may harm the rights of certain people or maybe of certain minority groups or whatever. And we see this liberal concept of freedom and how it leads to understanding democracy as ochlocracy. We see that very clearly in the right wingers that are on the rise right now in many states. Which is also why I take issue with many people analyzing what is happening right now as a global rise of fascism. I think that's a bit lazy and superficial, just calling every sort of far right a fascist. I would say what we are witnessing in large parts is not right-wing fascism. Of course, there is right-wing fascism. I would say there's also left-wing fascism, because I would say that fascism is just about subjugating the individual, about a sort of collectivism, about what the Nazis called Gleichschaltung, coordination, making everyone the same. And that is precisely not what the current brand of right-wingers, like Trump and his followers, or also the right-wingers here in Europe, what they are about. They are right-wing liberals. They are right-wing, what I in German would call die Ausklärung, die Pseudo-Aufklärung. So if Aufklärung is usually translated as enlightenment into English, you could translate Ausklärung as entwilightment, maybe. They are the right-wing Ausklärung, the right-wing entwilightment. Because they understand democracy, and I mean, they call themselves Democrats, right? They say that the enemies, that the leftists, that they ruined democracy and that they are the true Democrats. But they understand democracy as the mob demands, politics delivers. There is no such thing as rights. Consider, for example, Austria, where the leader of the Nazi party, which won the last election, at one point said that rights should follow politics should not follow rights. In other words, there should not be the rule of law that even the politicians, even the lawgivers are subject to, so they cannot give laws that are unconstitutional. But no, there should be the rule of rulership, so to say, the rule of power, the direct rule of the mob. And the laws should be made the way they want it, even if they go against constitutional rights. And those same Austrian Nazis in the elections, they had posters with the slogan, "Your will be done." Quite blasphemous slogan. Of course, by "your" they didn't mean God, they meant the mob. They said, look, those other parties, those leftists, they do whatever they want, but if you vote for us, we will do exactly what you want. You want to get rid of the refugees? It's unconstitutional, it's against the human rights of the refugees? Doesn't matter, we will get rid of the refugees for you. Likewise, here in Germany, there was a big right-wing protest movement about 10 years ago, which was sort of the kickstarter of the new far-right party. And they would go on the streets and they would scream, "We are the people." By which, of course, they meant we, the mob. That's what they really should have said. We are the mob. We, the mob, we should be in charge. If we demand something, like we demand you get rid of refugees, you get rid of Mohammedans, then you politicians just have to deliver. And the same you can see, of course, across the pond in the United States, right? When Trump was criticized about his deportations of immigrants, of refugees, and how they might be against the law, or they might be unconstitutional, he said that he had a mandate of the people. Of course, there is no such thing in the legal system and the political system of the United States as a mandate of the people. What is that supposed to be? But of course, what he means by that is the people elected me to get rid of those immigrants. So it doesn't matter whether that is against the law or not, whether my methods are constitutional or not. It is the demand of the people, read the demand of the mob. This would be exactly heteronomy. So the opposite of the rule of law, the opposite of having a constitution, the opposite of rational legislative, bringing order into the state and making sure that everyone, not just the majority, but also the minorities, can live in equality and harmony and freedom. The opposite of that is the people just demand, they make their arbitrary demands, and the legislative just delivers whatever they want, even if it means an attack on the rights of certain people. The same, once again, going with the analogy, the same would be true in the individual. If you are a moral person, your reason has autonomy, your reason gives laws to your desires, to your inclinations, not despotic laws, not laws that prevent you from having any sort of pleasure or joy in life, but laws that force you to seek your joy only within the framework of morality. While heteronomy is when your inclinations rule, when they are like the mob and just make demands, and reason is just their instrument that has to deliver whatever arbitrary desire they happen to have. But let's go back to this lecture's actual topic, to the moral feeling. Since Kant says it is not the yardstick of morality, just the driving spring, so again, it doesn't serve as the legislative, it serves as the executive branch of government, so to say. That is also why he rejects the term moral sense. Again, there was this moral sense theory, but Kant does not translate moral sense as moralischer Sinn into German, which would be the literal translation. Rather, he goes with moralisches Gefühl, which would mean not moral sense, but moral feeling. And to Kant, that's a difference. Because in his terminology, sense always, in some sort of way, belongs to the faculty of cognition. So a sense is something through which we are affected by an object and through which we learn something about that object. So, for example, we have the sense of seeing that lets us see colors when there's an object affecting us, or we have the sense of hearing, the sense of touch, and so on. And on the other hand, a feeling to Kant is something subjective. I gave my own lecture on the feeling of pleasure and of pain. To Kant, that's what all feelings in the end come down to. Some sort of enjoying our current state, or some sort of being displeased with our current state. But in either case, a feeling is about us, about how I, as a subject, am feeling. A feeling does not teach me anything about some sort of object. So that means, going with Kant's terminology, that if we had a true moral sense as opposed to a moral feeling, that would be like some sort of sixth sense. We could then sense, so to say, what is moral law, sense what is right or wrong, sense what is our duty. Then that feeling would be objective. That would be the case if it was the yardstick of morality. But this is not the case. Kant says there is no moral sense, no more than there is a sense for truth. Like, we cannot sense that something is true. I cannot just say, I feel the truth of something. Rather, I need to make an inquiry. I need arguments, I need proof, and so on. And just like there's no sense for truth, there is no sense for morality. Indeed, believing in a sense for truth would be what Kant calls Schwärmerei in German. Could be translated as enthusiasm often. Maybe it's better to translate it as raving. This raving, this Schwärmerei, always means that you go beyond your boundaries, beyond the boundaries of experience, beyond the boundaries of reason. So if you believe you have a sense for truth, doesn't matter if you apply it to the empirical world, like if, let's say, in front of a court, someone is accused of being a murderer, you say, oh, I just sense that he is innocent. I don't need to listen to the witnesses. I don't need to look at the proof. I can just sense he's innocent. Or whether you apply that sense for truth to the supersensual. You say, oh, I just know that there is a God. I just know that there's life after death. I can sense this. I sense the truth of this. I don't need further proofs. My feeling tells me this. So this is raving to Kant. And for that same reason, he says that Hutcheson, believing in a moral sense, comes dangerously close to practical to moral ravings, believing that you can just sense right or wrong. No, you need to think about what is right or wrong. What you do have is not a moral sense, it is a moral feeling. Again, a subjective thing, feeling good or bad. So you can say, I feel pleasure at doing this, doing these actions that I have understood to be good. It makes me feel good about myself. It makes me have, so to say, respect for myself. It makes me have reverence for myself when I do these good actions. And when I do bad actions, I feel bad about it. I have to despise myself. But this feeling is based on first intellectually understanding that these actions are good and these actions are evil. The feeling itself does not tell me that they are good or evil. It just says that I care about whether they are good or evil. So hence there's a moral feeling, Kant says, which is our driving spring, but there's not a moral sense in the sense of a yardstick, of an objective sense for morality. At least there is no such thing in the strict sense. In a less strict sense, we can speak of a moral sense, and that would be the sentiment. Sentiment is a word that Kant likes a lot, that he likes to use. Many people are not aware of that because it belongs not to his strict moral philosophy, and therefore doesn't appear in his groundworks to the metaphysics of morals or in his critique of practical reason, which are the works that people usually read. Rather, the sentiment belongs, so to say, to the actual applied lived morality and therefore to his anthropology. So if you read his notes and his lectures on moral philosophy and on anthropology, there you will stumble across this word, sentiment. And it's a word that doesn't exist in German. There's also no translation. It's just not a concept that the German language has. And Kant laments that and says, he therefore uses the English word sentiment. He says that we should start using it. We didn't, like it's still not commonly used in German, but Kant believes it should be used. Um, and to him, the sentiment is to morality what taste is to aesthetics and to the feeling of beauty. And I already described what taste is to Kant in its own lecture on what is taste. Um, Both let us make a judgment without really being conscious of a rule, right? Like if you have good taste, you can say this is beautiful. This is a beautiful painting or beautiful music or beautiful poem or whatever. But you probably cannot really explain and justify it. You cannot say, oh, it follows this rule, it has these attributes, therefore it must be beautiful. You just say, I just find it beautiful. And likewise, if you have correct sentiments, you will say, this is the right thing to do. I just know it. It's just right. And this is just wrong. Maybe I cannot fully explain why it is wrong, but I just know it shouldn't be done. But this is not a moral sense in the strictest sense, because this is what I already mentioned earlier in this lecture. This is, Kant would say, that you do have the moral law in you, in your reason. And this is very much not a feeling, but a thought, so to say, an idea. You are just not fully conscious of it. You have not fully reflected on it. And so, in your consciousness, it is just a sentiment, some diffuse, vague feeling of right and wrong. But unconsciously, it is not just a feeling, it is a thought. That's important. But Kant would say that most regular people who don't deal with moral philosophy, who don't consciously think about the categorical imperative, their morality is based on sentiments. That is, they may make correct judgments because unconsciously the moral law is there, but they don't fully reflect on it. And this is also how lots of conversations go, right? Especially amongst your close people, your friends. If they are your friends, they probably share the same moral sentiments, which means you don't really have to explain everything. You just immediately agree. Like if I tell my friends of this Austrian right winger saying the rights should follow politics, politics should not follow the rights, I don't need to explain to them how terrible that is, how it's the opposite of the rule of law, how it's basically totalitarian. They will just, so to say, immediately feel it. They will have the same sentiment. Or like when I tell friends that my neighbor, he went out of his door with the garbage in hand, and his little 1.5-year-old daughter started crying, and he told her, oh, don't worry, I will be right back in a minute, I'm just bringing out the garbage. I don't need to explain why this is a terrible way of treating children. Like, I don't need to explain in detail that first off, this is just stupid. She can't even speak yet. How do you expect her to understand what you are telling her? And even if she could speak some few basic words, she has another way of looking at the world. She's just a little child. They have a different sense of time. Like what's just a minute for you is maybe way longer for her. They have a different sense of space. Like she probably doesn't understand it. You're just around the corner, just down there in the yard. They have a different sense of abandonment. So you cannot expect as a grown-up the children to go up to your level. You need to go down to their level. You need to be there for them. So you need to accommodate them. They don't need to accommodate you. So take her with you. Yeah, maybe it's a bit more hassle-some. Maybe it will take a few minutes longer if you take her with you. Maybe you need to go twice because then you cannot take garbage in both your hands, but only in one hand. But that's what it means to be a proper parent. Once again, accommodating your child. And that is how you raise a child to have fullness, abundance, courage, to be a person that can become truly aufklärt and truly joyful and secure in life. While the way you raise a child, sure, to you this might just seem like a very minor thing, and you might just think, oh, okay, she cries for a minute, but then I'll be back and she will stop crying and she will have forgotten about it. But the thing is that this is not just a one-time thing, right? This is a daily occurrence. Like the regular child, the way they grow up, it's just again and again all these small pains and these small abandonments and these small betrayals and these small insecurities, and just a succession of them that piles up, and that ultimately lets them grow up into people who are just as unaufklärt as their parents were. But again, I don't need to explain all of that to my friends. I just need to tell them what happened, how the neighbor treated his child, and they will just immediately share my sentiment. But of course, this is also dangerous, because you can make wrong judgments and therefore have wrong sentiments. And if you just go by sentiments, if those are enough for you, if you never question where do my sentiments come from, which unconscious rule is making me feel that way, because self-reflection, self-criticism is really what drives Aufklärung, then you can never see where you are wrong, right? Like there are also people that have a sentiment that, let's say, homosexuality is wrong. So if I just told them that my neighbor is gay or whatever, their sentiment would be immediate rejection. And of course it shouldn't be. They should reflect on what is actually my problem with homosexuality. Is it really a bad thing, or am I wrong here? So Kant would say, in that sense, there is a sort of moral sense, there is a sort of moral feeling that doesn't just drive me to do moral actions, but that rather tells me what actions are moral or aren't, and that is the sentiment, the sort of moral taste, you could say. But this feeling, this sort of moral sense, once again, comes from an unconscious intellectual judgment, comes from an unconscious rule that we are just not fully aware of. The actual moral feeling, the actual pleasure or displeasure I feel at certain actions or at myself for doing those actions or not doing them, the feeling of reverence, that is not an objective yardstick of what is moral. That is just a subjective driving spring that makes me do what I, be it through a sentiment or be it through a conscious judgment, have judged to be morally right. If you really were to build morality itself and your moral judgment itself on a feeling, which is what all eudaimonism is ultimately about, right? I discussed in the lecture on the imperatives that to Kant there are only two practical principles, two principles of action. There's either his own principle of eleutheronymy, that is free lawgiving, through reason giving yourself a moral law, or what all other moral theories in the end come down to, there's eudaimonism, the principle of happiness. And happiness is, of course, a feeling. So if you base morality on a feeling, then whether you are aware of it, whether you want it or not, at the end of the day, you will be a eudaimonist. And this, in turn, Kant says, will always make you an egoist. So Kant uses the word egoism not precisely in the sense that we use the word now. So he doesn't necessarily mean selfishness as opposed to altruism. So you could be someone acting on, let's say, compassion and therefore helping others selflessly, maybe even sacrificing yourself for others. No, to Kant, egoism is mainly about how you make your judgments, basing your judgments only on your own self and what you think is right. If you base your morality just on a feeling, you are an egoist in the sense that you say, I feel this is right, therefore it is right, or to me this feels wrong, therefore it is wrong, without taking others' opinions into account. And this is not what we should do, Kant says. The measurement of truth is not our own limited self and our own limited intellect, but the general human intellect. We should not be egoists, we should be pluralists. We should assume others' perspectives, we should be in dialogue with others, and we should come to conclusions, whether it's about theoretical truth or about morality, that others could agree on, that could be explained to others, that others could be convinced of. We should not just say, oh, I have my feeling, and even if the whole world is against me, that I will simply not care. Like, I recently had this conversation with someone who told me, no, even if I'm the only person who thinks that this is wrong, I will still stick by that. I will not even listen to why others think it's not wrong. I have never ever questioned my feeling or my intuition when it comes to morality. Well, this is the height of unaufklärdness. This is exactly egoism. So, with this distinction between the yardstick of morality, which should be reason, and the driving spring of morality, which should be the moral feeling, this is also how Kant solves the conflict between rationalism and empiricism. I already explained this conflict in my lecture on the foundations of morality, so you might want to check that lecture out, where I said that according to Kant, all moral theories come down to either rationalism, so basing morality on reason, or empiricism, basing morality on something empirical, so something that you can, some sort of sensation, something that you can perceive, which in the end would mean some sort of feeling, right? And in this conflict, as always, Kant applies his sympathetic or his part-taking method. This too I have already given a lecture about. This method assumes that there is no absolute error, there's only partial error. And therefore, when you have such a conflict, when you have two different parties, two different opinions, philosophical schools, you should not just go on one side and completely reject and throw away the other side. Rather, you should try to find the partial truth in both, and you should try to combine them into a third, into a better understanding. Well, this is what Kant does here. Kant is a rationalist of morality in the sense that he says the moral law needs to come and be understood from reason. It cannot come empirically through some feeling. Then it would be relative, then it would be arbitrary, then everyone could have their own morality. No, it needs to come from reason. In that sense, Kant is a rationalist in morality. So he disagrees with the other rationalists, with the rationalists that came before him, who thought that through reason we just find a, so to say, objective moral law that is out there independently of our reason. Our reason is just what makes us find and understand it. But the law, so to say, floats in the ether somewhere, even without us. No, Kant would say that the law comes from reason. reason has autonomy, not heteronomy. It doesn't just find the law, it itself gives the law to itself. So only through our reason does the law, so to say, come into being. But nevertheless, the law comes from reason. In that sense, Kant is a rationalist. And in that sense, he rejects empiricism. But on the other hand, Kant disagrees with the rationalists when they think that cold, indifferent reason alone, just understanding what would be right or what would be wrong, is enough to make us act morally. No, here Kant says the empiricists are right. We need a feeling that makes us pick the moral thing, that makes us choose the action that would be right and makes us not choose the action that would be wrong. That is where the empiricists are right, but they are wrong, once again, in thinking that this feeling doesn't just make us choose what is right, but actually tells us what is right. No. We first have to understand through our reason what is right, but then there needs to come a feeling to add to our cold, otherwise indifferent reason, and makes us pick that action. That is, through the sympathetic method, the new third position that combines both the partial truths of rationalism and the partial truths of empiricism. Still, someone could think and criticize Kant and ask, isn't this inconsistent? Isn't Kant betraying his own rationalist principle here? He says on the one hand that morality should be based on reason, but now he bases it on a feeling after all. And indeed, Kant says that it is precisely the feeling which the villain lacks. Because, as I already said, the villain could maybe have a correct understanding of the moral law. Like, he could understand it, admit that what he does is evil, but just not care. Just not feel like caring. Indeed, that was the old Platonic error, right? To believe that the practical is based simply on the theoretical. So to believe that everyone really wants what is good and strives for the good, and they just don't all understand what is truly good. Like the evil people, they just make an error of judgment, so to say. They believe that something is good, which in truth is evil. But that would mean that no one really is evil when it comes to their will, because they all want what is good, right? That would mean that evil people are not so much evil, but rather they are just idiots. They just misjudged. They just went wrong. Like, the Nazis wanted the best for the people. They just happened to make an error of judgment and think it would be better for the world if the Jews were killed. Too bad that they misjudged, right? But not really an evil act. This would take everyone's responsibility away. This would mean that no one was really guilty, because you cannot really say you're guilty for misjudging, you're guilty for an intellectual error. No, Kant says, the morality is in a way based on a feeling. It's not enough, he says, to understand that a certain action is despicable. We need to actually despise it. We need to actually feel an aversion to it. Otherwise, we might still do that action. Kant says, since we are sensual creatures, intellectual creatures also, sure, but also sensual, our faculty of desiring always needs a driving spring, and that one always needs to be a feeling, always needs to be sensual. He says that morality, acting morally, is objectively necessary. That is, judging from reason, it is necessary. We ought to do it. And if we were just pure rational beings, like God is, then we would do it. There would not be any other possibility. There's no possibility of God ever doing evil. He has no sensual inclinations that could drive him to evilness. He always necessarily follows the rational, the moral law, and he, as a purely rational being, has no feelings, also no moral feeling of reverence, and he doesn't need such a feeling as a driving spring. But for us, who also have sensuality, while the moral actions are objectively necessary, subjectively they are contingent, meaning that we as individuals, me as this particular subject, I don't have to act morally. I don't have to act rationally. I can also be irrational and do an immoral action. And therefore, in order for me as a subject to be driven to a moral choice, I need a feeling as a driving spring. But Kant is not inconsistent or in contradiction with himself here, because, as I already said, this moral feeling is a practical feeling, as opposed to our regular pathological feelings. Because what Kant says is that when it comes to regular actions, again, all actions, everything that my faculty of desiring decides or chooses, is determined by some sort of feeling. But when it comes to regular actions, the feeling comes before the law and before the action. So I first have a certain feeling of pleasure and displeasure, and that is what makes me pick a certain action, right? So let's go with hunger. I feel hungry, sort of displeasure, and therefore I want food. And we can also be more specific, like let's say certain food is tasty to me and other food tastes disgusting to me. So the feeling is there first. And that feeling is what makes me choose this food or that food, right? It's not that I say, oh, I understand through reason that this is the food I eat, this is good food, and therefore I start enjoying the taste of that food. But rather, I first find, when I try it for the first time, let's say, that I enjoy the taste, and therefore it becomes something that I like, something that I want to eat. When it comes to morality, it's the other way around. There needs to first be the goodwill. So I want to do what is right. I want to follow the moral law. And the feeling follows the law. Because I want to do what is right, I start feeling good when I do it. And I start feeling bad. I start despising myself and regretting my actions when I don't do it. So the feeling follows the law. It's not the other way around, where the pathological feeling comes first and first makes me do that action. Kant says here that usually when we act out of certain inclinations, we have a certain love for the object of our inclination, but not for the inclination as such. The inclination is something we just have. We didn't pick to have it. So once again, let's start with the example of food. It just so happens that we are beings that must eat. We are beings that feel hunger. We are beings that have taste buds and that can enjoy certain tastes. And therefore, I may love certain food. Like maybe I have a favorite food that is my favorite because it tastes so good to me. Well, I don't necessarily, as much as I like that food, I don't necessarily like that I like it, right? Um, I can even dislike the fact that I like it. Like I can say, oh, to me, meat or cheese, it tastes so good, but I think that I should rather be vegan. Um, let's say for the sake of the animals, or let's say for environmental reasons. Through my reason, I judge that this would be better. So I wish they wouldn't taste so good. I wish I would find the taste of meat disgusting, because then it would be very easy to not eat meat. But since it tastes so good for me, since I have this inclination, it is hard for me to refrain from eating meat. So I wish I didn't have that inclination. That's what Kant means when he says we love the object of our inclination, but we don't love the inclination as such, right? Kant would also say that normally no one wishes to have an inclination. Like if you do have it, then maybe you accept it, maybe you don't question it, maybe you don't wish to get rid of it. You may, in certain cases, like the example I just gave, but many of our inclinations we just accept. But if we don't have a certain inclination, it's not like we wish for having it, right? Like there's many things that you could eat that you are not inclined at all to eat as a human. Like you have no taste for eating grass like the cow does, or you don't want to eat rotten flesh like the crows may do. Um, you don't feel attracted to feces like certain flies may. Well, a normal human doesn't mind that, right? It's not like we say, oh, I wish I had a taste for grass, or I wish I would be like the crows and be attracted to rotten flesh. No, I don't have that inclination, and I don't particularly care for having it. And now imagine if we had no hunger at all. Like if we were beings that somehow didn't need to eat, that could just feed off sunlight and that would be enough or whatever. Um, then we probably wouldn't wish for having hunger. We probably wouldn't say, "Oh, those apples on the tree, or those cherries, or that flesh of the cow. I don't need to eat it. I don't feel hungry. I don't feel appetite. But I wish I was a creature that experienced hunger and that wanted to eat those things." Or likewise, go with sexuality, right? Again, Kant would say we love or we desire the object of our inclination, but we don't love or desire the inclination as such, right? Maybe I'm straight and therefore I'm attracted to women, then it is the object, the woman that I want. But the attraction as such, the being into women as such, having a sexuality as such, is probably not something I necessarily want to have. I just happen to have it. But again, there are people who probably wish, oh, if only I was asexual, because I don't know, they think it's too much stress, it only leads to heartbreak or to frustration to desire other people, or because maybe they aren't straight, they are homosexual, and they are judged, they are persecuted for that, so maybe they wish that they were straight, or that they had no sexuality at all. So I can, or maybe there's a moral reason. Like let's say someone is a pedophile, then, but let's say he's a moral pedophile, then he desires the object of that inclination. He desires the children. He finds them attractive. But if he is moral, that is, if he thinks about that and understand that raping a child would be wrong, then he will not like that he has this inclination. He will tell himself, oh, I wish I didn't have this pedophilia, because if I didn't, then it would be very easy to not harm children, because I would not be inclined to. While now that I have this pedophilia, it makes my life much harder. It makes it much harder to be a good person, because I constantly need to fight my urges, my sexual attractions. So you can want something without necessarily wanting to want it, so to say. Again, imagine we didn't have sexuality at all. Imagine we were creatures that don't reproduce in a sexual manner. We would still know that sexuality is a thing if we observe other beings, like, I don't know, our dogs or our cats or whatever. But no normal, healthy human would probably say in that case, oh, I wish I was like my dog, who gets horny twice a year. I wish I also would go into heat. I wish I also would be attracted to others of my species, and I wish I also had this desire to stick parts of my body into parts of their body. If we weren't born with these desires, we probably wouldn't desire having them. In morality, it's exactly the other way around, Kant says. Here it's not that first there comes a feeling, a pathological feeling of pleasure or displeasure, and that feeling makes me want to do a certain action. But rather here, first, my will decides I want a certain action, and from that springs a certain feeling of pleasure at that action or displeasure at the opposing action. And here it's not that I desire the object, but not necessarily the inclination that makes me desire the object, but rather here I desire the action, and I don't desire the object of that action. Like if someone is about to drown and you are a moral person, so you jump into the water to pull him out. If you do it out of morality, it's not the object that you care about. Like, you don't care about this person, you don't care about this person's survival, at least not immediately. I said in the lecture on the goodwill, that for your morality, it's not important whether that person survives or not. It's only important that you had the goodwill to save him. Like, if you jump into the water and you swim over as fast as you can, but still you don't reach him in time, then that doesn't make you a morally worse person, as opposed to if you had reached him and saved him. What counts when we are just judging the morality of your character, of your will, is just that you had this goodwill. And the goodwill just wants the good action. It just wants to act in a certain manner, in a certain form, that is in this form of lawfulness, in the form of an action that could become universal. It's not about the result. It's not about the end goal. Now, you will start caring about that person and about that person's survival too, but that is only sort of the second step. You don't jump into the water because you want the person to survive, and jumping into the water and pulling him out is the means for him to survive. But rather you jump into the water because helping somebody survive is the right thing to do. And because you want to do that, then you will also start wanting him to actually survive. You will start your action to actually succeed. But that is the second part, not the first part. It would be different, once again, if you tried to save him for reasons that aren't moral. If you did it, again, out of a pathological feeling, be it general compassion, or be it specific love for this person. Let's say it's your beloved brother who's about to drown. Now, once again, the feeling comes first. You don't necessarily want to do that action. You don't maybe you're not a moral person. Maybe you wouldn't save a stranger. You don't want to jump into the water and pull someone out. But what you do want is your brother being alive. And so, since pulling him out is the means to achieving that, you will now do it. Here, once again, we love the object of our inclination, not necessarily the inclination itself. So, he happens to be my brother, I happen to love him. But if he weren't, I probably wouldn't wish for this love, right? Like if a stranger was about to drown, no one would stand there and think, oh, I don't care about the stranger. Since he's a stranger, I feel completely indifferent about him. But I wish that I would love him like a brother and that love would compel me to pull him out. No one would say that. If we don't have the inclination, we don't care to have it. We could probably still say, oh, this is a stranger. I'm indifferent about him as a person, but I want to be a good person. The moral law tells me to have reverence for his humanity, therefore to pull him out. And because of that, we would also start caring about him, caring about the actual success of that action. But that's the important difference to Kant. Normally, we don't care about our actions at all. Our actions are just means to an end. We would probably even be happy in many cases if we could get the end without the action, right? Like people maybe go to work not because they care about the work as such, but only because they want money. Maybe they would quit their work if someone just gifted them $1 billion. Maybe I go to the store to buy groceries and then I cook those groceries to have food to eat. But if someone just gifted me the groceries, or if someone cooked for me so I didn't have to do it myself, then maybe I wouldn't do those actions because maybe I don't care about buying groceries as such or about cooking as such. When it comes to morality, Kant says, it's the opposite. Here, it is the action as such, or the form of the action as such, that I care about. I want to do the good action. That is my goodwill. And the action is not a means to an end. The action is the end in itself. While the result, the consequence of that action, and I talked in my previous lecture about how Kant is against consequentialism, how consequences don't matter in morality, while the consequence of that action is an afterthought, is what doesn't really matter. So that is the difference here. And that is why Kant is not in contradiction with himself when he bases morality not on feelings but on rationality, but then in another sense says that the moral feeling is very important and we cannot be moral without moral feeling. It's not a contradiction because, again, pathological feelings come before our actions and we only start wanting that action because it feels good for us, while when it comes to morality, we first have the goodwill to do that action, and because we have the goodwill, from that comes the practical feeling that makes us actually enjoy that. That is why to the evil person, this is all just nonsense. The evil person who is without the moral feeling, without reverence, he will laugh about that. He will say, oh, you sentimental fools, having a moral feeling that just prevents you from doing what would benefit you the most, that just prevents you from being selfish. That's pretty stupid of you. But the reason they would say that is because to them there are only pathological feelings. There are only the essential desires and inclinations. So when they hear of a moral feeling, they probably think that it is one of those pathological feelings. It's maybe compassion. And then they will say, oh, poor fools who are afflicted with that compassion is making them do actions that don't benefit them, that even harm themselves. Good thing that I don't have this pathological feeling of compassion. But what I don't understand is that reverence, the true moral feeling, is quite different from compassion or empathy or any such thing. It is not something I'm afflicted by. It is something I create in myself. It's not that our duty comes out of our moral feeling, but rather we have this moral feeling because we want to do our duty. And it is even amongst our duties to create this moral feeling in us, says Kant, to cultivate it, to make sure it grows stronger. So it cannot be the foundation of our duties because, once again, it is a duty to bring forth this feeling. So to Kant, being moral, once again, and having reverence for the moral law comes together as one and the same. One cannot be solved without the other. And this also can be used to answer to the rejection of the cynics. There's always, especially nowadays, this cynical position that says, in the end, everyone is selfish. In the end, people who seem to be moral, they are just liars, they are just actors who fool others, or they are even hypocrites who fool themselves. But at the end of the day, everyone just cares about his own self. And those cynics will say, when you say, well, I do what's right, they say, oh, you don't do that because it's the right thing to do. You just do it for yourself. You do it because it makes you feel better about yourself. You do it because you like feeling like a hero, because you like feeling like a good person. You do it because you don't want to feel like you're a bad person. You do it because you don't want to despise yourself. So really, it's just selfish. I've heard that being said against Kant too, that in the end, despite what Kant claims, his morality comes down to some more sublime form of selfishness, because it's really about whether we can respect ourselves or not. But here Kant has a very simple but very wise answer. And he says, well, yeah, it's true. I do act morally so that I can have reverence for myself instead of despising myself. But this feeling is not what comes first, but rather my will for morality comes first. Because if I didn't want to be moral, if I didn't care about morality, then I would also not revere myself for actually managing to be moral, nor would I despise myself for being immoral. So those people, those cynics, they have it the wrong way around, because if you are actually an evil person, once again, you will just laugh about all of this. You will not care about feeling good about yourself. Or rather, being evil, doing evil actions will not make you feel bad about yourself if you truly are evil. You will not despise yourself for what you have done if you don't care about what you are doing being moral or not. The fact that you care, the fact that doing evil actions makes you despise yourself, while doing good actions makes you revere yourself, can only be if you already have a good will, if you already care about the moral law. So from this, we clearly see that the good will comes first. It's not a pathological feeling that makes us pick that action, but rather we first want that action, and because of that, we start feeling a certain way about that action. Here you can once again think back on my lecture on the faculty of desiring. which to Kant has these two faculties of the choice and the will. Choice being the one that picks, that chooses specific actions, that picks, I want to do A, I want to do B, while the will or practical reason is completely supersensual, is therefore not concerned directly with specific actions in the sensual world, but rather it decides in which manner, in which general form do I want to act? Do I want to be good, or do I want to always be selfish? And what Kant says is that the basic problem of morality is I am moral if I have a good will. If my will is I want to follow the moral law. But now my choice always needs a driving spring that makes it choose A over B. And those driving springs, they are always feelings. And as feelings, they always belong to sensuality. All feelings are sensual. If we were pure rational beings, we would have no feeling. And sensuality, once again, I mentioned that in many previous lectures already, sensuality to Kant means receptiveness. So we are sensual when we are passive, right? Intellectuality is spontaneity, is self-activeness, but sensuality is receptiveness. We are passive here, we are affected in some way, we receive some sort of affection, and that brings forth a certain representation in us. So if all driving springs are sensual, if they are all feelings and all feelings are sensual, then they are all receptive, then we are always passive when it comes to driving springs. But the difference is, what is it that affects us? Now, when it comes to the pathological feelings, our regular pathological driving springs, we are affected by some sensual object. We are affected by nature somehow, right? I smell a flower and it smells nice to me. I have a feeling of pleasure, then it's that flower that affects me. And of course also my own makeup, like my own genes probably, that give me this inclination to like this particular smell. The moral feeling, the feeling of reverence, here I'm not affected by something sensual. That would again be by the case for pseudo-moral feelings like compassion or like empathy. But the actual feeling of reverence, here I'm not affected by anything sensual. Rather, I'm affected by something supersensual. It is the will, practical reason, the good will that wants what the moral law dictates. It is the will affecting me. It is the supersensual idea of the moral law that affects me and that lets me have a certain feeling. So I talked in previous lectures, particularly in that on the apperception, on self-consciousness, about how Kant always makes this difference between the homo phenomenon, that is the appearing human, the individual self, that is me or you or anyone else, and the homo noumenon, that is humanity as such, the inner quality of being human as such, being rational, being a being with autonomy. And you could say that all feelings And therefore all driving springs are feelings that the homo phenomenon has. The homo noumenon as such cannot feel. He can only think. But usually the homo phenomenon feels because he's affected by other phenomena, by other appearances in the sensual world. While when it comes to the feeling of reverence, we in a way affect ourselves. That is, we as the homo noumenon, that is our own humanity, our own rationality, affect ourselves as a homo phenomenon. That is, as essential as an animal-like being that is capable of feeling. So that is what is special about this moral feeling. As a feeling, it has the quality of being sensual. That is true for all feelings. But its origin is a supersensual one. Pathological feelings are sensual in their quality and in their origin, while the moral feeling, reverence, as a feeling, it's still qualitatively sensual, but its origin is supersensual. Its origin lies in the goodwill that causes this feeling. And this self-caused feeling of pleasure at good actions and displeasure at bad actions, this reverence, this is what you need to be a moral person. And this is what needs to be your driving spring. I already discussed in the lecture on goodwill that to Kant, the legality of our actions doesn't matter much. What matters is the morality of our character. So you could do the best possible actions as long as they are not done out of reverence for the moral law and for human dignity, for the dignity not of the homo phenomenon, but the dignity of humanity as such, they are not good. Here, once again, I always point this out, once again, Kant is in complete accordance with the biblical morality. Because in the Bible it says, "For whatsoever is not of faith is sin." So what isn't done from reverence cannot be good. Anything else doesn't matter. That is why Kant, as I said in the lecture on consequentialism, by to Kant, there are no small sins that can be overlooked. That is also why to Kant, in his time in 18th century in moral philosophy, there was often made this distinction between sins of committing and sins of failing to do something. And Kant also rejects this distinction. He says it's just a matter of circumstance. If you are capable of not giving to the poor, then you are also capable in another case, in another scenario, of taking, of stealing from somebody. It's a matter of circumstances, like what desires do you have, how were you raised, whatever, what ideologies do you have, that determines your specific actions. But what really matters is, do you have goodwill? Do you have reverence for the moral law, and therefore do you do your duty? And that is all duty or no duty at all. You cannot just say, I sometimes act out of duty and sometimes I don't. Because if you sometimes don't, then clearly you have no reverence for duty at all. Then clearly, even in those cases where you do act according to your duty, you don't do it because it's duty, you do it for some other reason. Only actions that are done out of reverence for the moral law are truly good actions. But with all of this, I still haven't explained how exactly does this work? How is this possible? I have explained what the moral feeling is. I've said it's not the yardstick, it's the driving spring of morality. And as a driving spring, yes, it is a feeling, yes, it is sensual, yes, we are receptive here, but we are not receiving from a sensual object, we are receiving from our own supersensual will. So, in its origin, albeit not in its quality, it is a supersensual, an intellectual feeling. But how does that work? How can the will affect our sensuality? How can reason, practical reason as such, cause a feeling? Aren't those two completely different things that cannot come in contact with one another? Well, Kant says it cannot directly cause a feeling. But what our practical reason does when it gives to us the moral law is that it sort of restricts our desires and inclinations. Like, I desire to have something, to have a certain object, but my reason tells me I mustn't steal. Or I feel lust, I want to have sex with a person, but my reason tells me I mustn't rape. Or I hate somebody and I would like to kill him, but my reason tells me I mustn't murder. And even myself, I may want to think of myself as being oh so great. I may like to think, oh, I'm so attractive, I'm so successful, I'm so rich, I'm so smart. But then my reason tells me all of that really doesn't matter. All of that is completely worthless because all of that belongs to the sensual realm, and the sensual realm as such is worthless. Like, you could be the smartest, the most attractive human who ever lived. That's really not worth any more than being the smartest or the most attractive ant who ever lived. No, my reason tells me the only thing of value is the good, is morality. So the only thing that truly gives you worth as a person is if you are a moral person, if you conform with the moral law. And all of that can, of course, give me displeasure. Here it's good to go back to my earlier lecture on what is pleasure and pain to Kant, where I explained that according to Kant, all feelings, therefore also the moral feeling, all feelings are about pleasure and displeasure, and all pleasure is really just a feeling of my own vitality growing, being strengthened, while all displeasure, all pain, is some sort of feeling of my vitality being blocked. Like if I eat something and it tastes good, then that gives me renewed strength. I feel more vitalized by it. And if I hurt myself, if I feel pain, I feel like my vitality is somehow attacked. Well, the moral law that reason gives us attacks us in a way, because it tells us we can't follow our desires, we can't follow our inclinations in a certain way, and that brings us displeasure. And indeed, this is precisely why there are people who reject morality, right? Because they only look at this one side where morality is restrictive. They feel morality is some straitjacket that they are being put into, that it keeps them from doing what they would like to do, that it takes the joy and the pleasure from their life, and so they say, no, why should I follow it? It's just some despotic, arbitrary law that is being forced onto me. But Kant says this is not all there is, because the moral law is not just an obstacle to us. It doesn't just put us down. That would be if we were blocked from following our desires for some other reason, right? If I want to do a certain act that, let's say, is an immoral act, like I feel lustful and I want to rape, and it's just the state, it's just the police, it's just the threat of prison that keeps me from doing it, I would not feel reverence. I would rather feel resentment. I would say, oh, these stupid laws, this stupid state, stupid police, they keep me from really enjoying my life and following my desires. But the moral law is not just something negative, it is also something positive, Kant says, because it brings me freedom. The moral law is what first makes me notice that I even am free. I discussed this in the lecture on do we have free will? That according to Kant, if we didn't think about morality ever, we would never bother to stop and think about free will. Because if we would have no reason to ever think about our choices. We would just naturally choose whatever we like best. Why would we ever choose something that we like only second best or that we dislike? It makes no sense. So if I just followed my sensual desires, my inclinations, I would never ask myself, now I'm eating tasty food. Do I actually have the freedom to eat shit instead? Or do I actually have the freedom to take a hammer and drive a nail through my hand? Why would I? Why would I even think about it? Why would I even want to do that? But as soon as we start thinking about morality, as soon as the moral law tells us, you ought not to do this, you may desire this, like you may desire to steal this, but it belongs to someone else, so you mustn't touch it. You may desire to rape this person, but you mustn't rape. You may desire to kill this person, but you mustn't murder. Only now, when the moral law comes in conflict with our desires like that, do we start to realize that we actually have freedom. Because as I explained in that lecture on the free will, a shall implies a can. If the law tells us you ought not to do that, then that means that we actually have the freedom to refrain from doing it. Otherwise, we could not be responsible for our actions. Otherwise, the law could not tell us not to do it. So, yes, the moral law is an obstacle to our sensual desires. Therefore, it can be unpleasant. But at the same time, it makes us realize that we have freedom. It makes us realize that we are more than just animals, that we are more than these sensual, instinct-driven creatures, that we are something way higher and way more dignified, that we can govern ourselves, that we have autonomy, that we can act instead of acting according to the law of nature, according to our own desires. We can act according to the law we give ourselves, according to our own insight into good and evil. And this can bring us pleasure. Because again, any pleasure is a feeling of our vitality being strengthened. But there can be no bigger strengthening of vitality, Kant says, than freedom. Being free, having options, having autonomy, not being compelled, not being forced, but being able to govern ourselves, that is the strongest form of vitality there is. And therefore, it is also the strongest form of pleasure there is, Kant says. It is a pleasure that goes in some way beyond sensual pleasure, because it is a form of self-approval. I am content with myself. I approve of myself. once I realize I am so free, I am so strong, that I can even act against my own sensual desires. I am not their slave, but rather I can act according to what I myself reflected on and what I myself understood to be right or wrong. Here you can also go back to my lecture on the sublime and check that out, because this feeling of reverence, this moral feeling, is closely related to the aesthetical pleasure in the sublime. Because there was also this duality between the homo phenomenon and the homo noumenon there. I explained in that lecture that when we stand at a great abyss or in front of a raging storm, of the raging ocean, or of an erupting volcano or whatever, and this makes us tremble. And this means that at first we feel small and powerless. In the face of nature's power, we realize that as a homo phenomenon, as a sensual being, we are really nothing. We are just a small bug on this tiny, tiny speck of dust in this giant universe. And this can bring a feeling of displeasure. And I said there that if we were just sensual beings, there would just be displeasure. We would be like the dog in the thunderstorm that hides under the bed and whines. But in fact, it makes us realize that we are more than just this homo phenomenon, that we are also homo noumenon, that we are a rational being, and that no matter how small and insignificant and powerless we are as sensual beings, as rational beings, we are more than the greatest power in nature. We have more dignity than all these oh so mighty but unconscious and unfree natural forces. The difference is that when it comes to this aesthetical feeling of the sublime, it is something outside, something in nature. It is the great forces of nature that sort of blocks my natural desires. Now, here, when it comes to morality and to the moral feeling of reverence, it is not nature that blocks my desires as a homo phenomenon. It is my own reason. It is the moral law that I give to myself, which tells me, no, you mustn't do this. These things, doing them would be evil. But let's say that the mechanism is sort of similar, because here too, this can first bring me displeasure, because I'm denied my desires. But on second thought, it can give me a sort of higher pleasure, because it reminds me that I'm not just the homo phenomenon, I am the homo noumenon with a far higher dignity, because he is free. So hopefully with this you can see that there's no contradiction in Kant. Yes, he does say that mere rational insight into right and wrong is not enough. You need, in its quality, sensual driving spring to act morally. But this driving spring is itself nothing but the moral law. The feeling of reverence is our sensuality when it has been brought in accordance with our rationality. So we do act morally because we feel reverence, but we only feel reverence because we act, or we want to act morally. It's really one and the same. Being moral, Kant says, in the objective sense, it means acting according to the moral law that reason gives. That's what God does as a pure rational being. But in the subjective sense, which there is no subjective for God, but for us there is, in the subjective sense, being moral means acting out of reverence, means this feeling of reverence being your driving spring. But again, this feeling is itself caused by your own will, by the moral law. Just think for a moment what the word reverence, or if you want to go with some sort of other translation, also take the word esteem or the word respect or something related to that. Just think for a moment what it means in normal language, independently of Kant's philosophy and independently of morality as such. I would say that reverence is always paid to something that in some way is above us, right? Something or someone, like I can pay reverence to the king, for example. Something or someone that is beneath me, I have no reverence for. I can maybe love such a thing, Kant would say, but that's not the same as reverence. So one's child or even a pet can be loved very dearly, but reverence is for the elders, or again for the king or whatever, or for God. So it's for something that is above me. And what is above me makes me small in a way. It humbles me in a way. And that on its own brings displeasure. No one likes being humbled. We want to ourselves be the greatest, right? We don't want to have to bow our head. But when we pay reverence, or when we hold someone in high esteem, or when we have respect for someone, it cannot just be negative. It cannot just be that someone is above us and makes us small, so to say, forces us to bow. Like that would just bring displeasure. Like imagine when you are being bullied. Might be that your bully is above you. Might be that he's stronger than you, that he can beat you up. That he somehow humiliates you, somehow makes you bow. Or a tyrant in the state, like not a just king, but some tyrant who oppresses you, you don't feel reverence here. If anything, you feel resentment or hate. Maybe also despair because you cannot fight back, but you don't feel reverence. So reverence has this side of, yes, someone is above me, someone puts me down, someone makes me small, but there needs to be a positive quality. There needs to be something, so to say, which I can respect. So, for example, someone who has accomplished something, who is, I don't know, very smart, very educated, very accomplished in some sort of sports or whatever, that is something that we must respect. Because, yes, while it puts us down, while it makes us feel small in comparison, it is also something that is positive in its own way. And the interesting thing is that we are sort of forced to feel reverence, right? It's a feeling, even though we make it ourselves, we cannot help but feel it. Like language even expresses that when it says that we pay respect, for example, right? As if it is some tribute that I must pay. I have no choice, right? There can even be instances where you do so grudgingly, right? Like sometimes maybe you dislike someone, maybe you think he's an asshole, but you cannot help because he's so accomplished in, let's say, in his field as a scientist or whatever, or he's such a great artist, you cannot help but respect his accomplishment. So that's the funny thing about this feeling. And this is also, I would say, one explanation why so many people reject the moral law. Even people who would like to think of themselves as moral, people who have maybe no problem with acting on compassion, on empathy, um, but they reject the strict moral law as it comes from reason, and they also reject, therefore, Kant's morality. Like amongst many people, and not just lay people, even so-called experts, so-called philosophers, I would say philodoxers, um, there seems among some people this almost burning passionate hate for this philosophy and for this moral law, and this there seems to be this very strong desire to somehow reject it, to somehow disprove it, to use when it comes to the experts, not the lay people, to use all sorts of sophistry and pseudo arguments to show how wrong Kant was and why his moral theory doesn't work. And this always bugged me. And I mean, Kant doesn't go too deep into that. If you want a, so to say, psychological explanation for the rejection of morality that comes after Kant with people like Fichte and Nietzsche. But there's a little Kant has to say about it already. And I think here we have the answer, basically. The moral law, and also any person who is truly moral, who is virtuous, forces us in a way to pay our respects. We have to feel reverence. We just feel this feeling sort of grow in our chest. We just feel compelled to bow our head at this, well, this sublime dignity of the moral law, and the sublime dignity of anyone who is more than just an animal, who is more than just someone who follows his desires, maybe follows them smartly and prudently, maybe applies reason very well as an instrument, but still just follows his desires. No, when we see someone who rises above that, who puts himself behind, who acts for something bigger, who subjects himself willingly out of his own freedom to the idea of the morally good and of justice, we sort of cannot help but feel a certain reverence, and that humbles ourselves. If we ourselves aren't good, then of course, in comparison with the moral law and its demands, and if in comparison with the virtuous person who actually meets those demands, we feel pathetic. We feel despicable. We feel like a moral failure, like someone who shouldn't be. Of course, there would be a very easy way to get out of this feeling, and that would be to just become moral, to just become as virtuous as that other virtuous person, to become someone that you can feel reverence for as well, that others can feel reverence for, and that I myself can feel reverence for myself. That would be the way out. But those people who aren't good, who don't take this way out, they take the other way out, and that is they attack morality. They say, oh, the moral law, that's just a chimera, that's just a prejudice, it's just some ideology or some stupid belief, like some sort of old religion that we need to get rid of. And those virtuous people, they are not really that virtuous. They are just acting. They are just hypocrites. And that's why you get these people being attacked for the smallest things. Like I still remember when Greta Thunberg rose to fame, when Fridays for Future started, when for the first time she went to the World Economic Forum. And I mean, while everyone else was getting there with their private jets, she spent about 36 hours, I think, on train to get from Sweden over there to Switzerland. we should have revered that. We should have bowed our heads in respect and said, here finally there is someone who doesn't first think about her comfort, didn't just buy a plane ticket, but rather who takes this seriously. But rather here in Germany, the biggest thing people talked about for a while was there was some picture of her in the train eating breakfast, and she was eating bread that was in a plastic bag. And so they said, oh, what a hypocrite she is. She eats out of a plastic bag, so she doesn't care about the environment and so on. And that's something you can always observe in the evil and the non-virtuous people, that they hate virtue, that they hate good people, and they just try to find some sort of failure in them. They try to find some sort of vice in them. Anything that allows them to not feel reverence, to not feel, so to say, compelled by their own heart to bow their head and to feel pathetic in comparison. But since all of that is a little abstract, maybe, let me explain all of that once more with an example. Imagine you're being shipwrecked. Imagine you survive on a small boat with another person. And to make it morally even more obvious, let's say that other person is a small child. And let's say you have some food left, but it's not gonna last for long. Now, you could say, okay, I won't give any food to that child. I will take all the food for myself, so I survive for longer. You could even go a step further and say, I will kill that child and I will eat that child. I will resort to cannibalism in order to survive as long as possible till hopefully I reach land, or hopefully some other ship comes by and picks me out of the water. And obviously, this is what your sensual desire wants, right? You probably have this sensual drive for food, like you will start going hungry, so you will want to eat all the food, and then you will want to eat even the child just to help with your hunger. And also, you have, of course, the sensual desire to survive. You don't want to die. So you could follow this sensual desire of yours. And let's say it works out. Let's say eating all the food yourself and then becoming a cannibal helps you survive long enough. Another ship finds you, you are saved. You just pretend like you were the only one on the boat, like there was no child. No one ever finds out, and you go back to your regular life before you were in that shipwreck, and you can live on as if nothing had ever happened. No one ever finds out, no one ever blames you. If you are not a completely evil person who is completely rotten to the core, then you will spend the rest of your life beating yourself up over this and despising yourself over what you have done. You will spend the rest of your life with a bad conscience. Now, what is this bad feeling you are feeling? It's not a pathological feeling. It's not some sort of sensual displeasure, because on the sensual level, your life is perfect. You got what you desired. You got a full stomach, you got to survive, and now you're back at your regular life, and maybe it's a very comfortable life. Maybe you get all the things you desire. It's not like you are in physical pain. This bad feeling you are having obviously comes not from your body, it comes from your intellectuality. It comes from you thinking about what you did and saying to yourself, okay, I survived, but I shouldn't have. I am alive, but I don't deserve to be alive. I cannot approve of myself. I can approve of my physical state. Like, it feels good physically. My body feels fine. but I cannot approve of myself morally. And even if you are a completely evil person in that same scenario, then okay, maybe you won't feel bad, you won't have a bad conscience, you will just go on with your life and say, oh, what do I care about that child? But even then, at least you will not be able to approve of yourself. You will probably also not disapprove of yourself, but you will not approve. You will not be able to tell yourself, I should exist. You do exist, and since you happen to exist, you probably also want to keep existing. That's your sensual desire that you didn't choose to have, you just happen to have. But you cannot tell yourself that your existence has any meaning or any worth. You can maybe tell yourself there is no such thing as meaning. No one's existence has meaning, and people who are virtuous and think that somehow gives them value are just lying to themselves. Okay. But you can also not lie to yourself that for some other non-moral reason you have some sort of worth. If you are consistent, you need to say, objectively, it doesn't really matter that I exist. Personally, subjectively, I of course want to exist, but objectively, there's no reason why I should. Like, if I put myself into the shoes of a neutral, rational observer standing out of the universe, so to say, and just observing what's going on, and if I ask this observer, should this person, this human being who survived by eating the child, should he exist? Is it good that he exists? Then that observer would have no reason to say so. You can tell yourself there is no moral law, therefore what I did wasn't wrong, but you cannot tell yourself it was right. You can just at best tell yourself there is no right and wrong at all, nothing matters. Now, consider the opposite option. Let's say you're back on the boat and you're a good person. So you tell yourself, okay, I feel hungry. My sensual desires try to compel me to eat all the food myself or to even kill and eat the child. But you reflect on this and you tell yourself this wouldn't be right. I shouldn't do this. And therefore you don't. And you will of course suffer. Like you will feel hungry. Maybe you give all the food to the child. You eat nothing so that the child can survive as long as possible. And hopefully be saved. And you sacrifice yourself. And this will not be fun. You will not enjoy doing it. On a sensual level, you will suffer. You will starve. You will feel hungry. But at the same time, on an intellectual level, you will feel some sort of intellectual pleasure. You will approve of yourself. And in fact, the more you suffer sensually, like the stronger the hunger grows, the stronger the urge is to take some food for yourself or to become a cannibal after all, the more you will be pleased with yourself for not giving in to that. And as you are starving to death, you will be able to tell yourself, okay, I won't live, but I would deserve to live. I don't follow my sensual desires because I'm more than that. I have dignity, I have freedom, I'm a rational being, I'm not just some animal, right? An animal would probably, if it was on the boat with the other animal, even if it was its own child, at some point when the hunger grows too strong, it would probably eat the child. But I am not an animal. And for that reason, I can have reverence for myself. I can intellectually, morally approve of myself. And again, if I put myself into the shoes of a neutral, rational observer outside the universe and asked him, okay, this being there doesn't survive, it's about to starve because it chose to not eat the food, but should this being survive? Would it be a good thing for that being to survive? Would you approve of that being surviving and being saved? Then that neutral observer would say, yes, of course, that would be a good thing. And that is what this reverence is about. I have reverence for my humanity, my dignity as a free, autonomous being, capable of doing good instead of just being a slave to my sensual drives. That is more important to me, and that gives me a deeper pleasure than all sensual pleasure. So deep that I will even accept sensual pain if I must, because being able to approve of myself instead of having to despise myself is much more important to me than the greatest sensual pleasure or pain could ever be. So, in conclusion of all of this, Kant says that we cannot desire anything without having some sort of interest and without feeling some sort of pleasure at getting what we desire and some sort of displeasure at not getting it. That's simply how we are as sensual beings. Being without interest, being without pleasure and displeasure is only possible for a pure rational being. So, demanding that morality is only about rationality, is not involving any sort of interest or feeling at all, that would not make sense for a being such as we are, such a mixed being of intellectuality and sensuality. Kant calls such a morality a fantastical ethics, because it's just not realistic. But, he would say, most people only know pathological feelings, and they only know pathological interests. They only know doing an action not for its own sake, but as a means of getting something, as I already said, like shopping for groceries and then cooking just so we can eat. Not because those actions in themselves have value for us. So we would also prefer maybe if someone else just did it for us and cooked for us and we could just eat a ready meal. But what Kant shows is that there is this one practical feeling, this feeling of reverence, that when it comes to morality, it is possible to not want something because it feels pleasurable, but rather it is possible to have a feeling of pleasure that is caused by the will that we have because we first want something. It is possible to have autonomy instead of just heteronomy. It is possible to want an action for its own sake, merely for its lawful form. And it is possible to act, yes, we always act with interest, but it's possible to act not because we have an interest in something that we just so happen to have. Like, once again, if I'm straight, I happen to have an interest in women, and if I'm gay, I happen to have an interest in men. I didn't pick that. But rather, it is possible to act according to an interest that we don't have, but that we take. We can take an interest in something. We can decide that we want this to interest us. We don't have to. This is what all Aufklärung is about, being perpetrators instead of victims. We don't have to be passive, to just be victims of our pathological feelings, to just accept that we happen to have these and these interests and happen to not be interested in these other things. But we can say, I reflected about this and I come to the conclusion that I should have an interest in this, that it is just right. And therefore I take an interest in it, and therefore I start approving of it. I start feeling this pleasurable feeling of reverence. That is Kant's great accomplishment here in moral philosophy, to have shown that, to have found a practical feeling, to have found true autonomy. And I refer you back to my lecture on the significance of the beautiful and the sublime, because the beautiful, as I said in that other lecture, can be sort of preliminary for morality. It can be sort of, it can sort of help us in being moral people, because Kant would say the beautiful is different from the pleasant. Finding something beautiful means liking it, taking a sort of pleasure in it, without having an interest in it, without wanting to use it for our own gains, for our own pleasure. When it comes to beauty, Kant says we like something simply for its form. Its mere form that we observe, that we contemplate, its form in time and space, is judged by our power of judgment to be purposive. And this purposiveness, even if it doesn't serve our own specific purposes, is what we like. Well, here too, when it comes to morality, we should take pleasure not in the material, because something feeds into our desires and gives us sensual pleasure, but rather in the mere form of an action, because we just find that the form of it is in accordance with reason. The form of it is lawful. This is a core of Kant's philosophy in general. Sensuality is always material. It gives us contents, certain feelings, certain sensations, certain pleasures, while thinking doesn't bring forth any new material. What thinking does is always connecting, synthesizing. In other words, giving a form. All thinking is form giving, says Kant. And therefore, the supersensual, the intellectual, is always about the mere form. Therefore, once again, beauty is liked not for the material sensations it causes us, like a tasteful meal or like hot sex or whatever, but just for the form it has, independently of our interests. And likewise, morality is revered not for the material accomplishments of certain actions, not because they benefit us or because they benefit others, because they have good consequences, but simply because the form they have and the freedom displayed here, the freedom in rising above these material desires, that is something we must revere. Before I finish off, I do want to point out that there are inconsistencies in Kant, but they are not in his theory. They are in him himself as a person. If you want a philosopher who is truly one with himself and truly as a person on the height of his own philosophy, you need to read Fichte. With Kant, again and again, you can find that he as a person lagged a bit behind himself as a philosopher. So in his thinking, in his true philosophical thinking, he was further, he was deeper than on a personal level. And that is why you will find some passages that seem to contradict what I said. You will find passages where Kant says, you should act out of reverence for the moral law itself, for the dignity of humanity, sure. But if you cannot act only out of reverence, if that's not enough to make you do the good actions, it is okay to also use other feelings, pathological feelings, as aid. Feelings such as compassion, or such as a feeling of your own sense of honor. those Kant calls subsidiary motives. He says the main motive of morality should indeed just be you have a good will, you feel reverence. But if that's not enough, there can be these subsidiary motives. And this, of course, makes no sense if you compare it to what I said here in this lecture and what I said in the lecture on the goodwill and on consequentialism. And then the lectures on character and on compassion and the good heart. I mean, Kant very explicitly says that nothing has moral worth except the goodwill. And he says that it's not the legality of actions that matters, it's not being in accordance with the letter of the moral law that matters, but rather it's the spirit of the law. It's the inner morality that matters. So, therefore, I don't see how this can make sense. Virtue that needs the aid of something that is not itself moral is no true virtue. Other feelings, pathological feelings like love, compassion, honor, certainly can help us doing legal actions following the letter of the law. But that shouldn't matter unless you are a consequentialist after all, unless you do believe that in the end what matters is the result, not how you got there. But that is the opposite of what Kant says. So his own words here that he sometimes says are at odds with the spirit of his moral philosophy. But they are not just at odds with the spirit of his philosophy. There's really absolutely no room for debate, because they're even at odds with the letter of his philosophy. Because there are other passages where he very explicitly says that, no, you must only act out of reverence. If anything else is mixed in, it's no longer a purely good action. Indeed, I will next talk about evil, and Kant identifies 3 forms of radical evil, and this is the second form of evil, mixing the moral with the immoral, doing maybe a good action, but out of pathological feelings and not just out of the feeling of reverence. So here, the passages where Kant says it's okay if love, compassion, honor come along as subsidiary motives along with reverence, those passages are passages where I think the person Kant is speaking, the person of the 18th century, and not so much the philosopher Kant. Also, as a last note, I also want to point out that this feeling of reverence, in the strictest sense, it is only paid to the moral law as such, not to human beings. A human being as such cannot be revered, Kant would say. It's indeed something quite pathetic. It's really not better than any animal. It's just some sort of bag of meat that will very soon die and return to dust. When we do feel reverence for good, for virtuous humans, when we feel we have to pay reverence to a Greta Thunberg or a Martin Luther King or a Jesus, then Kant would say it is not the specific empirical person, it's not this specific homo phenomenon that we pay reverence to, like this Thunberg or this King or this Jesus, but rather it is the moral law in them. It is the fact that they have stopped just being sensual individuals, they have risen above that, and they have, so to say, become avatars of the moral law. They are not doing their own limited empirical will, they are, so to say, doing the will of reason, doing the will of God. And therefore we have reverence for them. So that is important. You can never have reverence for someone as such, as himself, as this individual. You can only have reverence for the moral law and for a human being only in as much as he exemplifies and lives and submits himself to that moral law. My deep thanks be to my supporters: Thomas Deuringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Oblomov, Ökobong, Samet Özkilic, Elif Özün, Yasin Özün, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.